नारायण आवाज आ रही है हमारी।
Yes, yes.
हेलो। हाँ। नारायण, pranam to all the viewers. Hope you all are fine. So welcome to our channel, and in today's session we will present to you a damn amazing topic. The topic has been made and created. It has been discussed and created by our guest Nina and Rishi here, and also one more guest who will join lately. So I guess the further about the further discussion about the topic will be done by Nina and Rishi only. So yeah, over to them.
Thank you for the introduction, Dharma. So, yes, namaste to all the viewers once more. And today the topic is going to be a little different from what we usually discuss. We have prepared this presentation over weeks and also done a lot of research on this. And the whole topic of it, the theme, the core theme that we're trying to unravel here is the unmaking of Hindu civilization. And specifically, we take the case study of Bengal in the 18th and 19th century. Because as you all might know that a lot of our problems, a lot of you can say narrative changes and stuff, they date back to these times. However, we many of us don't know the specifics or the exact nature of these changes that happen in our society and the way we view things from back then. This is basically an attempt to go back to those times and try to see what exactly happened with a more critical and more uh, also an appreciative eye in some ways, because in some ways Hindus responded well to the challenges of the time, some ways they did not. We are going to be we're going to take a step back and look into time as to how exactly things worked back then. So yes, that was my starting point. Rishi, if you have any remarks in the beginning.
Namaste to all of the audiences. After a long time, we are doing another session, and as Dharma said, it's a banger of a topic. And we got to know from Nainer what kind of journey we will go through with these sessions, because this is a very big topic, and it will take many sessions to discuss deep. Indeed, the case with 18th and 19th century Bengal, especially the period which is through narratives and uh, in our history books as well, we get to know this period as the Bengal Renaissance period, or the period where modern India was created. Now, the problems we have right now and the problems we face, especially with regards to education, some of the societal problems that we are still uh, trying to solve, but we are unable to tackle them. These things in detail we will get to see in here, because we could say this was the Waterloo moment of our history at that time. This was a period when a lot of churn happened, a lot of thesis and, and antithesis confrontation happened as well. Various factions were created, various narratives were created, various idols were created, various villains were created as well. So yeah, it's a very controversial period and also a very fruitful period as well, because many gifts as well as many banes we got to have. So yeah, uh, it's an interesting ride, and I hope you all will like and appreciate this. And please share this session, subscribe to the channel, and support us, because we are gonna make many more sessions on many more interesting topics, and for that we'll need your support. So thank you very much. Inner, all yours.
Yes. So coming back to the topic, this starts actually with a particular question that bothered me and also some of our other guests here. That Back in 1817, you might have, maybe some of you have heard, there is a particular college called Presidency College nowadays. Back then, when it was started, it's called the Hindu College. This college, started by David Hare and others, some other Hindus particularly, uh, it began with quite an enigma, and it produced some really different kinds of people. So the question that really puzzled me was that the people who built this institution, they basically wanted their sons to receive the best education available, and which at that time meant the English liberal education. But at the same time, these people who were sending their sons, they were proud Hindus. They were performing huge pujas. They were patronizing the temples, the Brahmins. They were observing their rituals in their daily life. They also, at the same time, they wanted their children to also thrive in the new colonial order. They were kind of interested in perpetuating, as we will discuss further later. The question arises at the moment in 1830. We see that these sons, they turn out completely different from what their parents imagined them to be. They are having parties, where they eat beef, drink wine, and all the stuff. They write essays calling their parents' religion barbaric superstition. They're openly mocking all authorities which their ancestors had adhered to. They're rejecting all the rules, and some even uh, basically throw all aside and convert to the religion of the colonizers, as Christianity. So, this is what haunts a lot. That this wasn't just an accident, that it happened kind of randomly because of certain eccentric, eccentric tendencies among these students. No, this thing was, it has an intellectual genealogy going back at least 50 years. And even that intellectual genealogy is produced out of events that were basically set in stone from the time of the starting of the British Raj. The categories that they used to condemn their old culture, the, you can say, the manners in which they behaved, it seemed it was actually a descendant of a particular British culture, which was produced here in India. Whether you call it the culture of the Orientalists or the culture of the Anglicists, that is up to you. But it was a descendant culture of that particular culture. So how did all of this actually happen? How did we get a generation to despise their own civilization? So we are going to actually explore that tonight. This is also relevant because we see many such cases even in the modern situation. People go to get liberal education, and they turn out haters of their own civilization and own values. So, yes, keeping that in mind, we can move on with the in depth analysis of this topic. So, this is the incident which particularly baffled me a bit. This person, Krishna Mohan Banerjee, he was a student of Hindu college, and he was actually compelled to convert to Christianity. How so? The thing happened was that uh, th- he was part of a movement called Young Bengal. Young Bengal was largely a movement led by a certain teacher named Henry Vivian de Rosio, if I recall his full name. And they have some particularly radical views. Some views that went against perhaps everything that was the norm of the times. One particular thing that they would, or you can say a handful of particular things they would stick upon to actually go against the norms of the times were going against idolatry, eating beef, drinking wine uh, in excesses, basically, and being completely materialistic, which was going against the culture of the time. And most importantly, they had refused to observe the rituals and the way of life that their ancestors had followed because they believed that it was a barbarous superstition and so on. In this incident, these students who were obviously all mischievous and trying to rise or basically get a rise of people around them, the Orthodox community, and so on. They went into this Krishna Mohan Banerjee's house and they cooked beef and threw it at a neighbor's house. So it happened so on so. And what happened as a result was that Krishna Mohan Banerjee was evicted from his house. Then he converts to Christianity. And what happens after that is that he also has a lot of followers later, and he becomes an influential figure who converts a lot of others. This is probably the incident that really piqued my curiosity, and from this, we should try to understand what really went on in the mind of Hindus to produce such a progeny. So, yeah, we shall move on to the next slide here. But the questions we are seeking to answer is that first, when and how did the idea of reform within the Hindu framework transform into wholesale rejection and repudiation of the Hindu frameworks of thinking? Second, what made the first question, why I'm talking about this is because, as you can see, the Derosians or the Young Bengal movement, they were actually in complete wholesale rejection of whatever the Hindu frameworks of living were. So we keep that in mind. Move to the second question. Second, what made British validation become the standard of legitimacy? And why did Hindu elites internalize British contempt rather than reject it as a foreign prejudice, as they did during past occupation? This we shall also see as we move ahead that it was really true that it was indeed British validation that they were kind of seeking when they changed their manners, their ways of life, thoughts, and so on. And we study basically in this entire presentation how exactly did Hindu elites internalize this content rather than reject it as a foreign prejudice. Third, we also try to find out who benefited materially from performing self criticism and how did these economic incentives during colonial times match with ideological transformation. Basically, if someone was too closely attached to them, we can kind of draw the dots and point out exactly why they would also engage in the kind of self criticism that the British encouraged. So, yeah, through this presentation, we attempt to solve these questions with answers from our limited knowledge and research. So, yeah, Rishi and Nocturnal Patriot, do you have any thoughts on this so far?
Patriot can go forward, I guess.
Yes. So what becomes apparent here is that a lot of the old elites were trying to make a place for themselves within these changing tides, and their main goal here was to social climb in this new system. The best way to do that was either to strike a deal with the company or perhaps look for greener pastures, maybe escalate higher and talk with their superiors. More will become apparent as we proceed, I'm sure.
In my case, the first question especially intrigues me because from the families that they came, mostly these were families which had great pedigree, if you could say, from today's standards. Also, the society was a much more conservative society, unlike today. So, what was it that affected them in those institutions, and what was the overall uh, hegemonic ideas which were roaming around at that time, which eventually made these students change their ways so drastically that they literally became enemies of their parents or ancestors' religion and ways of life as well. Yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree with both of your points. So I'll move on to the next slide. So here is something to set the background for exactly what Bengal was coming out of just before the colonial rule. So this slide is crucial for establishing the contrast between the previous era and the new era that just emerged from the British colonization. So 500 years of Islamic rule, or more than that, you can if you count it carefully. They were not general on the Hindus because temples are destroyed, and there is enough evidence of archaeology, epigraphic, and textual evidence as well. A lot of forced conversions happened. There were rules such as the jizya tax, marking the non-Muslims as second-class subjects, and Islamic rulers with varying degrees of enthusiasm actually made a religious hierarchy in the society where Hindus are actually put at the bottom. At the same time, and this is the key point, like Hindu civilization, which was still under the Islamic civilization, it maintained its coherence. Sanskrit scholarship still was continuing. Temple traditions were still being preserved, and temples are continually being rebuilt, even if they were in a lot of cases destroyed. And you can say even the Guru Shishya paramparas, which transmitted knowledge across generations, albeit in a smaller form, they continued across generations. And the most important point, there was no kind of a crisis of confidence. Be- um, just because they lost to the Muslims politically, Hindu elites didn't conclude that Muslim criticism proved Hinduism false. They didn't internalize the contempt of the Islamists. So why not? Here, there are possibly several reasons. First is that Islamic rule, though politically dominant, was never culturally hegemonic because they produce culturally less material, perhaps. That is my hypothesis. Second was that a lot of Islamic rulers, or the rule in general, they needed Hindu administrators, Hindu generals, Hindu revenue officials, and so on. So this created a kind of space for cultural autonomy. Then there was also the thing that there was no claim to a universal civilizational superiority, uh, because there was some element of Islamic scholars also who kind of took, you can say, sciences and so on from Greeks and so on, and from their predecessors, so they didn't entirely reject Hinduism as false and all. But yeah, that probably didn't have that much of an effect. So yeah. So what did the Hindu elite's world actually look like on the eve of the British conquest? We move on to the next slide.
I would
So
like to add something to the previous slide.
yes, you can say.
Yes. So there was also this other thing, the matter of law that you raised. The third point is very important here because uh, one thing was very clear, since the Hindu populace was like, they more or less had understood that they would not receive the kind of help they sought from the from the Muslim rulers, because either the Muslim rulers would not understand the Hindu rules, nor would they be able to deliver quality judgments based on the Hindu rules. So in many cases, the Hindu population was like, they had kind of made peace with the fact that they would have to consult their local leaders. In which case, there was like, there was a lot of local diversity, as in from area to area, uh, the rules tended to differ a lot, and it was chaotic. Whenever there is a lack of a central authority who understands you, there's bound to be a lot of chaoticness, because local leaders will give their respective vidhans, thus leading to a lot of chaoticness. So they kind of like, they suffered from the lack of a capable leader who could understand all their problems and kind of deliver a global solution. So that was there.
Right. Yes. So we can move on to the next slide then. So here we try to paint a picture of what the world of the Hindu elite, in specific in Bengal, looked on the eve of colonization. So before 1757, we are looking at. So if you were a Hindu of the elite class in 1750s, your world had a certain kind of, you can say, a stability, because all said and done, the Even if the rulers were changing all the time, your wealth, it came from the land, and that land which was held, that was probably a position that was held for generations. And even if you look at the thing of about social status, that also didn't come from royal patronage, because the ruling class was not in Hindu. It actually came from their lineage, or it came from their caste, or it came from how generously you patronize temples or institutions in general. And education, it meant Sanskrit if you were focused on religious and cultural matters, and Persian if you needed function in the administration. And once again, I would like to emphasize on the fact that there was actually confidence. Even after the 5 centuries of foreign rule, the Hindu elite didn't actually feel inferior to their uh, colonizers, to the Muslim colonizers in this instance. They felt as they did in the past, they always felt that their religious and philosophical traditions, they were sophisticated, that their social arrangements made sense, and that their way of life was actually worth preserving. There was no an itch to reform continuously throughout and throughout. So yeah, then we move on to when the actual things began to change. That is 1757. So 1757, we all know that the Battle of Plassey happens, and the governorship of Bengal is basically given over to the East India Company. They win the Diwani grant in 1765. These dates you would have kind of heard in every history textbook, but the implications that the uh, particular events had, they are not exactly spoken of more in depth, because well, what the biggest implication here was that the East India Company now controls the revenue system. And if you were a Hindu zamindar from this time and you wanted to maintain your position, so far you had basically cultivated your relationship with the Mughal, or the, you can say, the local Nawab elites, right? You learned the Persian protocols, you understood their political culture, you had your own networks with them. And suddenly, when this all changes, everything is moved towards a particular city, Calcutta, where the which is the center of political power of the British, who have just recently got the Diwani rights over a huge province of Bengal, Bihar, and you can say the adjacent regions as well. These English merchants, uh, once more highlighting that they are actually merchants and not really soldiers and so on. They don't care about their Persian poetry that you know. They don't care about the protocols of the Mughals. They have an entirely different criteria for who they favor and who they don't favor. So this made like an entirely new set of skills was supposed to be learned by the people, by the Hindu elite at the time, and this change began to slowly happen. Then we look more closely at who the British were and how the Hindu elite initially perceived them. So, traders at the gate. This slide captures a fatal miscalculation. So, initially, the Hindu elite looked at the East India Company and saw merchants, say like the merchants with guns, maybe, but also just merchants in general, that they could just do business with them, and they would do their bidding basically. So the quote here is important. Between 1750 and 1757, the English in Bengal turned into imperialist swashbucklers and large-scale extortionists. This transformation, it happened so fast that the local elite couldn't adjust their mental models. They were still operating under the assumptions from the 1740s, 30s, and so on, uh, which was also a time of political turmoil. But this was a new kind of political turmoil to them. So the asymmetry of awareness is kind of crucial here. The British understood they were building an empire, but the Hindu elite did not think that. The Hindu elite thought they were just a set of merchants who were here to do their business and not really run the kingdom per se. that they were going to outsource it to them, but that did not truly happen. So moving on, we cover the one of the questions we discussed in the beginning is the question about who actually prospered in this new order. This is where we need to be clear-eyed about the material interests. Who rose under the British rule? So our hypothesis is that not the old zamindari families for the most part. Many of them were too slow to adapt, too invested in the old ways, and too proud to become servants of merchants. Hmm. The people who actually rose, they were kind of different. They were merchant and banking families who had commercial ties with the companies, who were willing to give loans. Then there were people willing to serve as intermediaries, translators, then there were agents, and basically anyone who could make themselves useful to the English. This created a new elite whose wealth was structurally tied to colonial continuity. So basically, their entire job description that was dependent on the patronage of the British in this instance. And the consequence is that when your depends on pleasing the British, you start to see the British ways as reasonable. When your children's futures depend on British approval, you start to wonder if maybe British criticisms of Hindu society have some merit. So, yeah, economic structures also shape the psychological orientation. We should keep that as we move forward.
Just a
So, any
question,
point
Niner.
on this, Rishi? Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question on this actually to you. So, what do you think happened to those
Hmm.
entrenched elites which were there serving the Nawab erstwhile? Now, because the British administration had come, wouldn't the British administration be a bit suspicious towards them? That was a question of mine. What do you think?
So, this happened in a particular ways. One aspect of it we shall cover later. One was the famine and the the permanent settlement. The other aspect was that
Hmm.
many of the local zamindaris they actually went in support of the British against first Sirajuddaulah and later even against Mir Jafar. It was kind of a strange coincidence.
Okay, okay. Yeah, Patriot, if any points you have.
Uh, Not at the moment. Yes, but I agree with whatever Nina said that whenever you add incentives into the picture, financial incentives into the picture, uh, it does play a role in slowly but surely aligning you with the person who is paying who is paying for your expenses. That's what happening. A group of useful clerks are rising who want to make themselves useful to the British Raj as soon as possible, and they want to rise in the shortest time possible, make as much money as they can. In the process, they keep accumulating bias. So let's see how the slides progress and what more we come to know as we proceed.
Yes. So we move on to one of the greatest, not the greatest, you can say a horror event, more like what happened at that time, which was the Great Bengal famine. This was one of the consequences of the East India Company basically taking over. This was 10 million people dead, which was said to be one third of Bengal's population at that time. And this was not because of any natural disaster, other than a drought which was said to happen, but largely because of a famine, because of hoarding of grains by the company agents. The actual problem in their administration was that the tax collection was huge, and because of this, the India Company actually profited at the same time of the famine. As you can see in the quote here, Boris Walpole, speaking in the British Parliament, he blamed the company's monopoly directly. And this wasn't some post-colonial revisionist judgment. This was actually a British politician of the time who knew exactly what happened. For our study, this famine it actually matters in two ways. So, firstly, it shattered any illusion that the company rule might be benevolent. This was extraction of resources until death. Second, it also devastated the old social orders. Percival Spear, he notes that two-thirds of the old aristocracy, they were ruined in this period. This famine didn't just kill peasants, it destroyed the economic base of the traditional elite. And out of this vacuum, from this huge famine, uh, you can say a vacuum which was created, a new elite would come. One with a very different relationship to both British power and to the old Hindu tradition.
And furthermore, during this period, we see a group of the old families trying to sustain themselves even by selling of land. So, like you said, many were on the brink of financial ruin. They had to resort to selling off their own land at cheaper prices merely to sustain
Yes.
themselves and survive through that stormy period. So, yeah.
Also, also for the audience, in this channel we read Anandamath of Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay. This is the very period which Bankim speak, tries to explain to his audience. This is that very same period where the zamindars are selling their homes and going to Kolkata as destitutes. These things are happening at that very time. Yeah, Ninar, please.
Yes, and this is a particular quote from Percival Spear, who actually wrote a whole book on the history of India. And even you can see basically in the contemporary historiography, even they recognized what exactly was going on here. So yeah, we can move on to the next slide. So another example as for the tyranny of the times is the fall of Nanda Kumar. So the execution of Maharaja Nanda Kumar is also one of those events that reverberates beyond its immediate circumstances. He was a prominent Brahmin aristocrat, someone of actual standing in traditional society. And what actually happened was that he dared to accuse the Governor General, Warren Hastings, of corruption, of graft, basically. The British response was to charge him with forgery based on flimsy evidence. And at the time, the rule in England itself was to actually hang someone for forgery. But the rule in India was actually different. So they tried him with the British law and actually had him hanged publicly. This was, as Edmund Burke here notes, that this was actually a message to the natives that that if we are seen, if we notice any actions that are threatening the British power, then we are above the law and we shall humiliate everything you hold sacred. And this is another way of how they kind of taught psychological submission as well.
In short, they
Also,
put an end to any potential whistleblowing. So anyone who called them out for their actions would be dealt with in such a dreadful manner. So any potential whistleblowers would be silenced. The message was clear.
Yes.
indeed, indeed. And Ninar, also patriot, you both can comment on it. Wasn't it the case that Nandakumar was hanged publicly in a bazaar? Like it was made a spectacle for everyone
Yes.
to look at.
It was clearly
Yes,
like
yes.
exemplary
It was
punishment, a
public.
public spectacle meant to drive fear into the hearts of the commoners. So, in
Hmm.
future, any of the elites who would want to play smart with the British, in short, calling them out for their actual actions, would have to think multiple times.
Yes, you are right. He was actually hanged publicly in a square. So, and there were people there to witness him as well. So the kind of hanging public they do in England. So that kind of thing.
Yeah, it
Yes,
would
in
have
England, I
been
think
horrific.
hanging is the punishment they mete out to the most fallen of criminals. So hanging is meant for thieves. That is the kind of I mean, the most dishonorable punishment they could possibly deliver was this, and they did it to an actual Maharaja, one of the old elite from one of the most prestigious families in Bengal. They did it to drive a message into the minds of the others. So they would reconsider any decision of questioning British judgment.
Yes. So moving on, that was to give an idea of what exactly it was under the early years of British rule. So covering a few important events after that, we see that Warren Hastings and his successors, they understood something sophisticated, that they can't rule the population alone by force as well. They needed the systems to make their rule seem legitimate and even seem like necessary over the past anarchy. So he came up with a judicial plan, and they actually had, I think, a Supreme Court in Calcutta made at the same time, which functioned with British judges as well as Hindu pandits and Muslim Maulvis and so on to interpret the local laws. After that, he then makes a code of Gentoo laws, infamously. We are not going to cover it in depth, but yeah, that was also another thing. 1781, he makes a Calcutta Madrasa. Then 1791, they established Sanskrit College, I think, under the with help of a Jonathan Duncan, if I'm correct. And this is also the beginning of what we might call contained Orientalism, that they kind of show interest in the Indian learning through opening these institutions, making these laws, or at least respecting these laws in theory. But there was the fact that they were always in the service of British power, that you could never threaten the British power with them. Yeah, so that was there. Moving on.
Also, if you could return to the previous slide.
Yes.
Yeah, so just I'm sure our audience would be aware the term Gentoo here refers to the Gentiles. That was a term used to refer to the Hindus. So, yeah.
Yes, yes. That was the common word for Hindus at the time. Moving on to the next slide, we are going to now see the Orientalism and when it reaches its peak with the founding of the Asiatic Society. So in 1784, Sir William Jones again, he founds the Asiatic Society. Over the next 2 decades, we see that British scholars will translate the Bhagavad Gita, they will translate Shakuntalam, the laws of Manu, that is the Manava Dharma Shastra, and Jones himself, he will announce a research that he found out that Sanskrit belongs to the same linguistic family as Latin, Greek, and English. To them, this was quite exciting because for the first time, European scholarship was taking Indians quite seriously. They were comparing Indian literature with Greek literature. Then they were comparing them with Plato. You can say I've seen some comparisons of Homer to Kalidasa and so on. Then Hindu elites who were previously dismissed completely as heathens or as Gentus, that was also a kind of derogatory term. Now they were kind of they had the you can say, what should I say? They had the point to say that if you can praise us, then we can also praise us under your standards. Particularly, Jones' discovery about Sanskrit was electrifying. It meant that Indian language, that is the language of the Vedas and Upanishads, was a cousin to the classical languages of Europe, and that Indians weren't as barbarian as they thought before. That they were heirs to a linguistic tradition that they believed that the West also had. So the implication is then that is what comes to mind, that they try to imply in this phrase that your past was glorious, your ancestors were magnificent as ours. And the question that naturally follows is what happened if ancient India was so great? Why is contemporary India not so great? And with that doubt in mind, the Orientalists basically
Also,
uh,
to sow the notion that
praised.
we the British are here to upgrade you to our standards, to remind you of your past glory, and to raise your standards back to par. So that notion was there. Like
Yes.
that was like their covert. I mean, possibly that was their covert objectives. Hence the Orientalists.
By the way, Nina, isn't this the time when these books are being circulated in Europe? Germans, especially, start getting attracted to it. So we have Goethe, right? Goethe is praising Shakuntala, especially. We know of that, and Schopenhauer and
Most
others
famously,
are starting
Voltaire.
to read.
Voltaire in France.
Okay, okay, okay. So even Voltaire as well. Okay, okay. So these texts are now then starting to influence Enlightenment movement as well, right? At least some quarters of it.
Yes, and some even say that some aspects of the movements, such as utilitarianism, they have some borrowed ideas from these texts as well, from particularly Hindu texts.
Hmm. Okay.
So one thing
Yeah,
I
I
would,
guess we can.
one
Oh,
aspect I would like to point out here is about the rediscovering of India's glory. So what this pre-assumes the thing about what Jones was actually thinking of. He was kind of projecting his own Protestant history into India, because Protestant history also portrays their Christianity in the same manner, that originally when Jesus Christ and all were there, it was pure, it was simple Christianity. Then the Catholic era comes, the Catholic medieval era comes, and everything is corrupted and so on. And they have a revival in civilization when Protestants come back and so on. So this kind of seems like an echo of that. That is a noticeable point.
okay. Okay. So they are also myth making as well, not just researching our text, but even myth making. Hmm.
Yes, that was one thing. Here we see some of Warren Hastings' thought on Orientalism, because broadly said, Warren Hastings was actually the father of Orientalism. So Hastings wrote, every accumulation of knowledge, and especially such as is obtained by social communication with people over whom we exercise a dominion, founded on the right of conquest, is useful to the state. It is the gain of humanity. This tells you about the actual objective of why they were actually pursuing the knowledge. It is explicitly said, it is useful to the state. It is the gain of the humanity. And as Gleig, uh, one second, as Gleig aptly points out, the Orientalist credo really represented the reverse side of a new philosophy of cultural encounter. In his cultural policy, Hastings aimed not only to produce a cultured class of English civil servants, but at providing the means by which Indians might revitalize their own culture. Gleig writes, he encouraged bodies of learned Pandits to settle in Calcutta and support them while they translated out of Sanskrit into more acceptable dialects the poems and the mythological and the moral treatises of their native land. He founded colleges for the instruction of native youths in the laws and usages of their own country. He held out inducements to the study of the natives of English literature and English science. He labored, in short, to not only promote the political but the moral and rational improvement of the provinces. So he believed that this kind of patronage was actually useful for the, um, you can say, the Hindus as well,
The
while also
keywords
believing
here
that
to be
it is,
considered are morality and rationality. Morality here being Christian morality, and rationality here being the Christian sensibility that they are to be upgraded to. The natives who were once glorious and have fallen because of the time that they spent immersed in quote unquote superstition need to be upgraded to Christian morality and Christian sensibilities. Hence rationality, hence their moral upgradement. So that
yes, yes,
was
well said.
probably the notion.
That is an important point, really important point. So, so here we can uh, finally say that Hastings was quite explicit that the knowledge of Indian civilization would make British rule more effective and more stable, and that this was the explicit goal stated by here. And from this, we can also keep in mind that the Orientalists, they weren't the neutral scholars. They weren't objective in their study. They were studying for a purpose. The purpose of colonial administration, and for the colonial administrators who happened to be scholarly, or scholars who served colonial administration. It doesn't mean that scholarship is worthless, but it is useful to point out for what assumptions it carried and what it was used for.
So,
So,
Niner,
moving on to the next. Yeah, I
yeah,
should cover a
just
few more slides and we can discuss this together. There's also
fair
slides
enough.
on Orientalism.
Makes sense. Makes sense.
Yes, so the Orientalist high and hidden barbs. Here's the double edge of Orientalist praise. On one hand, now Indians could hold up their heads as civilized, cultured men. That's generally meaningful. After being dismissed as heathens and barbarians, being recognized as heirs to a great civilization mattered. But or we also look at the implied contrast, Golden Age versus Dark Age, that ancient Vedic India, like the old days of Christ in Europe, that was rational, that was philosophical, that was sophisticated. But contemporary India, it is superstitious, it is idolatrous, it is also degenerate. This framework, it basically handed in Hindu intellectuals a poison gift. It said it was praising your ancestors, but it said that you have fallen. The rituals you perform, the images you worship, the customs you follow, those aren't expressions of living tradition. They are corruptions of an ancient tradition. And that your own religious practice is the evidence of the decline, the manner in which you practice it. Then we have to also think about the psychological effects of this. If a foreigner just attacks a civilization, you can kind of dismiss it as saying it's just prejudice of a foreigner and he doesn't know me. But in this case, the foreigner has actually made an effort to find out who you are. He praises your ancestors while also criticizing your present in a more sophisticated manner. That is much more harder to resist psychologically, because now your own pride in your heritage, it becomes a weapon against your living practice itself. We have to think about that. So this whole thing about the golden age, dark age as well, a lot more can be spoken about this. The first thing is about how I spoke about how this is partly borrowed from the Protestant framework of thinking of their own Christian history. Apart from that, there is also the Enlightenment theory as to how they looked upon the stages of history. There were thinkers like Montesquieu, and from thinkers from the Scottish Enlightenments, such as I believe in James Mill comes under Scottish Enlightenment. He also believed that societies pass through stages of development, that advanced societies have certain features and backward societies have certain other features. The so-called advanced societies are supposed to have property rights, quote unquote. They're supposed to have individual liberty, quote unquote. And the backward societies, they're supposed to have idolatry, superstition, and communalism. Or you can say that their society was more communal in nature and not individual. That is another theory that comes up. Then third
And
way
also
of
the
uh,
definition of superstition was obviously, I mean, anything that they did not understand, anything that according to that anything that their Christian sensibility did not allow them to interpret was labeled as superstition. Simply.
yes, correct. And moving on to the third point, that there was actually another group who were romanticists, basically that who valued the primitive, but they believe that everything modern is corrupted from the primitive. In the same manner, they also derive this from Christianity, because you know how Adam eats the apple and everything has been dog shit since. So that is the kind of mindset they have. So yeah, that was there. So the problem here is that this becomes a trap for our Hindu reformers, that we are constantly being just we are told that our past is great, but our present isn't. And criteria set by them. So yeah, that really put a huge problem for us. Any thoughts on this, Rishi and Nocturnal Patriot?
I believe this is also something that they borrowed from Christian morality, because even in their own morality, it is being said that everything was fine in Eden, and then suddenly Adam and Eve ate the fruit of knowledge and they fell from grace. And everything has been going wrong ever since, be it their Sodom, Gomorrah, or the different destructions that they went through. And then, in order to deliver their people from sin, uh, the Son of God comes and saves people and creates this new, this new stream of thought that helps lead people back to God from, the path they had diverged from. So,
Even the story of Tower of Babel as well.
yes,
Even there
clearly.
as well, we get to see, right?
In
That
They are against too much of diversity. They believe in homogenizing identity. So wherever they see diversity, they have. Christian theology has always attacked diversity, for that matter.
indeed, indeed.
So their idea has always been there needs to be this shepherd who will lead a flock of disciplined sheep to their Lord. So
So one,
Jesus, or whoever the
mm,
prophet is playing the role of a prophet, is playing the role of a shepherd who will lead a group of obedient sheep to their Lord. So, yeah.
we have a very weird example of this as well, especially in this period after Jones is producing such works. We see a very spurious work coming out of France called Azure Veda, or the original Veda, where they try to mangle the translations of the Vedas, the very smaller parts of Vedas which were being translated by William Jones and other Colebrooke and other Orientalists. So they used that text and mangled them in such a way to produce a narrative that okay, so originally Vedas were completely monotheistic and they had quote unquote light of God upon them as well. Amongst the nations, they also had the light of God. But later on, as Nainer and Patriot has said, they got corrupted due to priestcraft. And we know which kind of priestcraft they are referring to and what are the allusions as well. Yeah, Nainer.
Yeah. So in that instance, they are usually thinking of Catholic priests, which they are projecting onwards into Brahmin priests.
Precisely. Yes. They're projecting the problems they see, they themselves have faced in their system onto that of the countries they are colonizing.
Yes. So let's move on to the next topic then. So while the Orientalists were praising the Hindus, on the other hand, there were rules being changed by the British interlocutors as well. So in 1793, Lord Cornwallis he freezes land revenue in perpetuity. What happens in this is that from now on, zamindars will owe the company a fixed amount forever. If they pay, they keep their estates. If they don't, their estates get auctioned and they get sold. On the surface, this looks like a gift to the zamindars, that there is security, there is predictability, and rules won't change over 10 years and so on. Then there would be no more arbitrary extractions, that they ask someone some amount of money and the other person another amount of money. They won't do that. But
And the
the reality
responsibility even
was,
becomes hereditary. So they get to keep the assets for a few generations as long as they pay up on time.
yes, yes, correct. Yes, and it is officially hereditary, that it was sanctioned by them, not just kept like squatters earlier. So yeah, and but the reality here, it was different. The revenue demand was actually quite high, and if a zamindar couldn't pay, either because of bad weather, famines, or you can say droughts or anything, his estate was actually sold off. And this is said to have happened to one third of Bengal's estates, which changed hands, basically were sold to new owners within the first 10 years of this rule being implemented. You can imagine the kind of churn that happened out of this. Old aristocratic families who had held their lands for generations, they found themselves dispossessed. And who bought the auctioned estates? Basically, largely Calcutta merchants, the company collaborators, people ready with cash and connections to the new order. It was essentially a social revolution disguised as administrative reform to get the people most tied with the British in power in all locations. Lord Bentinck, I think his quote is given here. Yes, his quote is given here. A later Governor General. He was quite frank about this purpose, that it was to create a vast body of rich proprietors deeply interested in the continuance of British dominion. It wasn't about good governance, it was about creating a class a bi- or a caste whose interests were structurally aligned with colonial rule from Calcutta. But there is an even deeper twist in this, that permanent settlement as a rule, it wasn't just administrative, it was also ideological in various ways that we shall see in this. This is where we need to understand the ideas behind the permanent settlement and not just the policy itself, not the specifics of the policy. So Cornwallis and his advisors, when they were looking at Bengal, they diagnosed the problem of revenue extraction as the problem of unclear property rights. The belief in England was that secure property, particularly, I believe this belief starts with John Locke in England, and in their in legal theory as well, it starts from him, that secure private property, it is the foundation of civilization. That without clear property rights, there could be no incentive to improve land, no incentive to industrialize, no incentive to put investment in the land. And uh, this was basically the ideological foundation which they started off. The existing Bengali land tenure to the English eyes, that was hopelessly confused, because there would be multiple overlapping claims. The zamindar would collect the revenue, but he would not own the land. The riot would have rights, but it was not defined what were the rights. The rights were always negotiated with each zamindar differently. Then the Mughal state, or you can say the Nawab state, which was over these zamindars, they had theoretical sovereignty, but under them the zamindars did whatever they wanted. So this, the British, they called it as a backward and irrational, and they proposed to fix it by applying rational English principles to impose basically property rights, the concept of private property in India for the first time. So I get some quotes from the book called A Rule of Property for Bengal, written by Ranajit Guha. In his masterful study, he shows how the permanent settlement was justified in the language of enlightenment improvement, that they weren't just extracting revenue, but they were civilizing the zamindaris. They were not just dispossessing the old families, but they were actually creating proper property rights. That is what they believe. This is basically the template for what kind of reforms they were supposed to bring. So you can see how even something as simple as a land reform can be ideologically oriented in this manner. This goes back to one of the questions we had asked in the beginning about. Um, I should move back to that slide briefly.
Economic incentive.
No, no. First, when and how did the idea of reform within Hindu framework transfer into? wholesale rejection and um, basically repudiation of Hindu frameworks of thinking. In this case, they start with the assumption that the unclear property rights and the irrational land tenure, this has been reformed, that there had to be an wholesale rejection of the old order and a new British order had to be established here. The old social order was backwards and we have modernized it.
So civilization
And
here clearly meant making them aligned with the British civilization's goals is civilization. So that is the
correct,
process of civilizing people. As long as you're aligned with
correct.
our goals and our interests, you are civilized. If not, then you're redundant and backward.
Yes. And you can see that even such a thing like as a land reform, even that can be ideological in various ways. And additionally, another reason this was done was to basically emulate the English estate model. They were also kind of idealizing the uh, English countryside, where they had their noblemen with certain patches of land with a secure tenure over years, and they used to not change it. They used to pass them down hereditarily and sell them or buy them and so on. And this class, it always had a particularly fixed tax to the crown, so it was always loyal to the crown. Cornwallis, he explicitly states that he wanted to recreate this in Bengal.
Hmm.
Yes. So
So it's a political
that was,
project, basically.
yeah, it was a political project. And the ideology behind it was John Locke's liberalism, which believed that the foundation of civilization is secure property rights. We can keep that in mind.
Indeed.
Then, apart from this, we see that alongside the economic transformation, they started instating a racial hierarchy as well. We see the rule of the no native high office. In 1793, the same year as the permanent settlement, Cornwallis established what's sometimes called as the Cornwallis Code. Among its provisions, one was that Indians could not hold senior positions in the colonial administration. The higher jobs, that is the positions of real power, they were reserved for Europeans only. Compared to Mughal rule, one can say that there were still Hindus in comparatively higher administrative positions as well. The system was all hierarchical, but it was not entirely closed off. This was a lot more damning that the British did not really care about your merit or how loyal you even were, how much you basically followed them and so on. But they put a permanent ceiling that you could never cross the ceiling and become part of their system in that manner. So yeah, this had the profound psychological effect as well that it created a class of educated Bengalis who had invested in English skills, who had invested in their networking with the English, they had invested in the English system through, you can say, through their commerce, through their capital, and so on. But their loyalty would not earn them their equality with the British. This kind of also creates later the nationalist movement, which is essentially, at the beginning at least, a movement to have equality with the British. But that was in the long term. In the short term, it created a peculiar psychology that they were trying to prove their worthiness in front of the British and also proving their religion as similar to theirs, as we will see future. Yeah, so that was that. Moving on. Now let me show you a primary source on the effects of these policies. So I'll read out this because I found this quotation quite useful. This is from David Kopp's book on British Orientalism. So many Hindu and Muslim zamindars share the same fate when, in March 1793, Cornwallis changed the legal status of these traditional tax collectors and made them landlords obliged to pay a fake tax every year but lose their property. Whether from lack of industry or inability to function in the new role, zamindars were being displaced by the new urban commercial elite of Calcutta, who had the wealth and influence to buy up considerable property lost by default. What probably hurt the Persianized Hindu most of all was the Cornwallis policy of excluding natives from the responsible posts in the administration, thus leaving this highly educated group unemployed. On the other hand, long association with an alien culture may well have enabled many of these people to survive, since they were flexible enough to adjust to the new social cultural values of the Europeans. This was particularly true of the Tagore family, which soon had established profitable relations with the French in Chandarnagar and with the English in Calcutta, and of Ram Mohan Roy, who grew wealthy from his association with the English. We shall cover many such cases as we go ahead. So, here we see, in the words of contemporary, one second. Yes, so how did the old elite actually respond to the rules that were laid out earlier? That is, the permanent settlement and the non native high office rules that came in the Cornwallis Code. They try to adapt and in their own way, and they had their own coping mechanisms for this. So we look at these three boxes. On the left, we see the Tagores, then we see Navakrishna Dev and the general pattern. What do they have in common? Basically, collaboration with the existing English elite. And this is not exactly to condemn them as bad individuals or anything, but they kind of had to find a way to survive as well, right? So this is natural in a lot of ways. Or else, as we have seen earlier, if they're going to go entirely against British, they would be hung like Nanda Kumar was. That was also a possibility. So most of the elite families they chose the option of surviving, to adapt and survive. They pivoted to serve the company. They migrated to Calcutta, which was the new center of power. Then they used the new wealth to buy the old status markers. Many of them started patronizing temples, many of them sponsored larger and larger festivals, and they actually still performed the rituals that maintained the social standings of theirs within the Hindu society. Here, from David Cobb's book, we get the observation that these early collaborator elites they produced no modern intellectual class. They were content with the material success and the social prestige. They were not really asking questions about civilization, about religion, about tradition. They were happy with getting by. The question would come later from a different generation, the generation that comes after these, who were pretty much all educated in British institutions and they were internalizing British ideas. So, but the collaborator generation here, they laid the material foundation for the reformer generation that was to follow. And while the old elite was adapting, new forces are entering the scene, basically. Here's something more on the elite survival strategies. So, Rishi and Nocturnal Patriot, any thoughts on these?
Yeah, we see in case of let's start with Namakrishna Dev. So this guy, uh, he starts as a very normal uh, person, son of a clerk, I think, working for another zamindar at that time. Not a very big shot, but he becomes a big shot, especially after his role in Battle of Palasi, a very significant role. We will not go deep down into the political implications as to why he chose a side, but yeah, he was in one of the side, and it was the victorious side. Let's just say that he remained Hindu, as we see in his biographies as well. There is a Bengali biography of his. We see that even though he is uh, adjusting with the new elite, the British, He's continuing the traditional forms of societal exchange, customs, traditions, even we could say funding them as well. He sees, especially he looks at British arrival as a great opportunity. In fact, organizes one of the biggest Durga Pujas for the first time in Kolkata, if I am correct. Patriot can correct me on this.
Precisely so.
So
Precisely so.
he's the guy.
Yes.
Hmm, hmm. It was a big deal at that time because after a long time after end of the Islamic rule, Hindus could
Many saw it as the ushering in
openly
of a golden
celebrate.
age in which Hindus could actually raise their heads and live in peace with some self respect. So, definitely
Absolutely,
a celebration was called for, and he celebrated Durga Puja.
yeah. So we see such an example with Navakrishna Dev, but and then we see examples like over here we see Govindaram Mitro, who's called the Black Deputy. Uh, by the way, this man Govindaram Mitro, his home is just a blocks away from Navakrishna Dev's house right now at Shwabajar. So they were pretty much neighbors as well. Even here we see that he made his money as a collector in Kolkata and promptly brought land with it, much to the advantage of his descendants. So he became a zamindar as well, besides being a tax collector.
So, as we can
These were
see,
the ways by which they were
Calcutta is
raising
slowly
themselves up.
rising
Yeah,
to prominence. The same Calcutta that the British purchased is slowly becoming a prominent hotspot for activity. And these successful employees or businessmen are purchasing land in Calcutta and settling there promptly.
so another example over here, it's given Ramdulal De,
Ramnal,
a
yes.
very famous. He's also called the first millionaire of Bengal. Especially at that time, he was a millionaire, so it was a very big deal.
And he is
Bengali
also
merchant.
another prominent rags to riches story. He rose from nothing
Absolutely.
and became one of the wealthiest businessmen back in those times.
Yeah. His case, I would say, I mean, both of you can comment on it. I would say he was less of a collaborator, but more of a, like, as a good businessman, he kept contacts with the new elites, and being a genius at his own job, he kept on being successful, I guess. What would you say, Patriot?
Yes, precisely so. Precisely so.
Yeah.
While
Now, yeah. Yeah, Patriot.
Dwarkanath,
Go ahead.
yeah, Dwarkanath Tagore, he came from one of he his background was significantly different from the other three. However, he came from a family of landed gentry. They had ancestral land in Joshore, and they were from a Pirali Brahmin family known as the Tagores. And for the sake of pivoting, they chose to also enter trade, precisely Dwarkanath did. And he was successful as a trader too. Uh, Rishi Kanad,
Yeah.
yes.
Thank you so much. Son of Dorpanaran, mm,
No,
son of Dorpanaran, and his grandson, I think, is Dwarkanath,
yes,
right?
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So this man collaborates with the British elite of that time, gets into capitalistic activities as well as a trader. Um, but unlike Ramdulal De over here, he was a bit different. He was someone, as Nainer was speaking about, he was someone who completely internalized what is called the Western culture or the Enlightenment behaviors. He internalized those, and maybe it's because it also helped his prospects as well, business prospects especially. Also a bit of a bohemian, if you could say so, allegedly. Those will be discussed later on. But yeah, he was one of those collaborator types who was very much in fond of Westerners and of British elite, especially.
Yes, he was one of the first Anglophiles, we can say. So he was very much an Anglophile, and he quickly picked up the skills that would help him survive in these changing tides. He tried to foster better relations with the company and even the British Crown wherever possible to see if it could serve his interests.
Indeed, and he learned a lot. Right, he was a fast learner, especially at that time. He uh, immediately learned about all of the laws which were being enacted by British, the Supreme Court procedures as well. All of these he
Yes.
became well versed in, and that really helped him a lot. Yeah,
Also, when
Nirav,
he
please.
came to businesses, he was also kind of pioneering when, for example, in starting presses and so on. He bought many presses and started newspapers and so on.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now we move on to a different kind of presence that is also at this happening at the same time that we haven't covered so far, but it's quite important. So the missionaries in 1799, the Serampore Baptist Mission arrives in Bengal. Now, Christian missionaries had been present in India for centuries, even in Bengal. There were the Portuguese who were already there in Bengal for years. There were the Danes and other parts of Bengal. So, what made Serampore different? First was the timing, and second was the strategy. The timing was really crucial. They arrived at a moment when Bengal's traditional social structure had already been destabilized. First by the famine, then the permanent settlement, then the new economic and the social order that was forming under British rule. The old confidence that they had from basically removing the old Mughal order that was starting to wane, and people were starting to look up to new kinds of authorities in the British. In this unstable situation came men with sophisticated strategies for cultural transformation. The Sirampore missionaries were there: William Carey, Joshua Marshman, and William Watt. But they were not really like the kind of missionaries we think of today, the crude Bible thumpers. They were quite strategic thinkers in that they understood that converting a civilization requires more than just preaching, that they need to control education, they need to control printing, they need to control the terms of the debate. Let's walk you guys through some of their strategies here. So first, we talk about the key figures. First of them is William Carey. He is the actual intellectual leader among the three, the who we call the Serampore trio. He was a self-taught polyglot who knew many languages, who also is said to write uh, among the first writings of Bengali, at least in a modern way, you can say. He also wrote a particular text called the Inquiry into the Obligations of the Christians to use means for the conversion of the heathens. This text, which was written 1792, even before he actually came to India, this was one of the central texts that the modern missionary movements used. Then we have Joshua Marshman. He was the educationalist, basically engaged more with the educational institutions. He led the mission school and the translation efforts as well. Then there was William Ward. He was more of the surveyor, the printer, and the publicist. He managed the press in Sirampur, which was quite famous at that time, and I believe the first press in India also. And he also wrote extensively about Hindu society. So, more about the timing. It's not the first time that Hindus encountered missionaries. We had missionaries in the Portuguese held territories as well. But As I mentioned earlier, the structures in Bengal were crumbling and something truly new was emerging. And at this vulnerable moment, the missionaries had to strike. They chose a particular place called Sri Rampur, which was called by the Danish as Srirampur, and it was basically a Danish colony, and it was not in under the British territory at that time. The reason why they chose Srirampur was because the East India Company actually officially prohibited missionary activity in its areas. They were also afraid that the missionary activity might actually provoke rebellion among the population. In this manner, it is also said that British were more tolerant than the Portuguese or the Danish. But yeah, we can keep that in mind. This situation, though, it lasts until 1813, when Parliament is basically forced by various lobbyists, various missionaries, and so on to actually pass a law allowing the missionaries to convert freely in British India. By then, Srirampur, the trio, they had essentially perfected the methods into how to attack the society of the times. So yeah, here are some quotations that we have from David Cobb's book. So, uh, uh, any thoughts on this, Nocturne Patriot or Rishi, or shall we continue more on the missionaries?
Yeah, I think we can
We can go
continue.
forward, I
We
guess.
can continue.
Hmm.
Okay, so on this strategies of subversion that they used. So the first strategy that comes up is establishing printing presses. So why would they do that? Is because whoever controls printing controls the production of knowledge. This comes from the experience that they had in Europe itself. The Protestant Reformation, it would have not been as effective if the technology of printing was not in Europe. It is said that the what was said basically that the whole pamphlets that went against the Catholic Bible, the original Bible, that uh, was spread in mass with help of these printing presses. The and which was invented by Gutenberg, obviously just a century or 50 years maybe before the arrival of Martin Luther. So the idea spread really fast with that, and they wanted to implement the same kind of mass, uh, you can say, production of knowledge through the printing press in India. Before
Hmm.
Srirampur, Bengali literature it existed, but in manuscripts. Basically, people would write them in hand, or and every few years, I think, when the manuscript is expiring, they have to copy it again and again, and the manuscript was very prone to getting damaged and so on. So yeah, but these printed books that were coming out of Srirampur, they could not be damaged, and they could be mass produced, and they were being sold for cheap and so on. This being controlled by the missionaries was quite an important thing.
Yes,
Second,
I'll
the
just add a few points here. So
yeah,
apparently, traditional texts, as it is, the traditional manuscripts that the Hindus used were written on palm leaves or bhurja patras. Besides that, they had the paper that the Hindu population had kind of adapted to was that which was made from cotton pulp, which again was found to be very brittle. Like it's not very good quality. It was like you may have seen ancient calendars were made from such paper. But again, cotton pulp paper was not very hardy. Comparatively, the kind of pulp that was used to make modern paper, like bamboo pulp and stuff, uh, were more durable and were found to be good templates for writing. They were long lasting. Somehow, since these, bamboo pulp and like this material, it was being handled by the alien people or mlechas, according to, according to the Hindus. Many of the Hindus were apprehensive about handling uh, this new paper. So it took a while for the Hindu population to adapt to handling and using and writing on paper. So that was also there.
Yeah. So moving on to the second point, the second way of subversion was to produce grammars, dictionaries, and translations. Why did they do this? Because whoever writes a grammar and whoever writes a dictionary, they define what counts as the correct language. And whoever, what, for example, they choose a certain word, they can choose to say that this word means so and so. And at certain times, if they were attacking a traditional text, they could say that they could mock the traditional text, saying that the word does not match the meaning of it in the dictionary. This was also another reason for dictionaries being first made by them. Essentially, with this kind of translation work as well, the missionaries are positioning themselves as the authorities on Bengali language, that they were the authorities and not the Indians themselves. Third, they had the idea of um, creating schools to not just preach to adults but to educate children, specifically in Christian moral instruction. This must be kept in mind. The practical skills got students in the door, and the Christian instructions that shaped their worldview. Fourth, uh, there were also stage debates with the Hindu pundits of the time, debates that were held according to rules that favored the missionary positions. This created spectacles of Hindu defeat that could be publicized. Fifth, and the most insidious probably, is the translation in both directions. First, what they would do, they would translate the Christian texts into Bengali or the vernacular languages to spread the Christian ideas in the most, you can say, the simplified or in the most appealing manner to sell them, basically. At the same time, they also translated the Hindu texts into English to create an audience which understood the religion of the Hindus in the manner the missionaries wanted them to understand it. This was for the English audience in England, and also it was to create a favor for them that Hindus are in so much darkness, and we are here to I don't know, civilize them and so on. So yeah, that kind of favor thing would get sympathy if these writings were made in advance. After that, uh, such a thing is also done by a particular book by William Ward, where he has written a book called Account of the Writings, Religions, and Manners of the Hindus. It was presenting Hindu religion to European audiences in the worst possible light, while positioning missionaries as the experts who knew the Hinduism better than the Hindus themselves. So, yeah, the many aspects of this, the first aspect I covered, the printing revolution itself. This was basically an emulation of the model that was copied by the Protestant Reformation. Then, about Ward's account of the book which I just mentioned, it was a polemical work, and it had a lot of attacks on it, Hinduism basically. Every attack you imagine, even that is put on us today, that was put on us back then. Things about caste, treatment of widows, child marriage, superstition, thinking, then astrology as a superstition, then idolatry, and then image worship, polytheism, even describing our festivals as obscene, as degeneracy, and so on. Everything possible was written in these books, in these polemical attacks against Hinduism. The schools are also an interesting thing, but I think this is not the period when a lot of the major schools are formed. The major schools tend to form after the period of discussion. So, yes, that was on the
Indeed.
missionaries. Any points on this, Rishi and Nocturnal Patriot?
Amazing summarization, by the way, and such a dangerous ploy. So they become authorities of our language. They also become authorities on
Oh,
describing our
right, right.
religion as well.
Rishi, can I just briefly continue on this? I'll just cover the last few points.
Uh,
So,
okay.
about William Carey as well. This particular person is quite an interesting character that we all need to know about. So this is excerpt from David Kopp's book. I will just read it out for the viewer. Carey's devotion to the Bengali language has been the theme of at least a dozen excellent articles and books by Bengali scholars. Carey chose Bengali not for it, but Carey he chose Bengali not for its inherent beauty, but for its potential usefulness as the most effective medium for reaching the masses of Bengal. In 1795, after preliminary observations of Bengali culture, Carey wrote of the Bengali people. They are very avaricious and deceitful, and cruelty to animals and to each other are two common evils. Their civility is extreme and their ignorance also, except very few learned men among them. They know nothing of geography or astronomy, but are much addicted to astrology. Carey's letters of the 1790s were unflattering in reference to the Bengalis. The superstition, ignorance, and degradation that Carey found so widespread in Bengal convinced him all the more that Bengal needed Christ desperately. He wanted to comprehend Bengali culture deeply, but in order to do so, he required fluency in their language. Unfortunately, he was not enjoying great success acquiring it. On August 13, 1795, he wrote, one great difficulty in speaking to the Bengali people arises from the extreme ignorance of the common people, who are not able to understand one of their own countrymen who speaks the language well without considerable difficulty. Here he is calling himself a countryman because he learned Bengali. They have a confined dialects composed of very few words, which though work about and make them mean almost everything. We make another excerpt from David Kopp's book. Here is we may confidently hope that the same consequences would be the result arising from the translation of Sanskrit works, particularly this is on the translation of Sanskrit words to English, basically. So we may confidently hope that the same happy consequences would be the result arising from the translation of Sanskrit works, particularly as it is supposed that they contain many contradictions concerning the present deities and devotions. When these circumstances shall have been made manifest to the people, is it not possible that they might forsake and relinquish many of their foolish and idolatrous prejudices? And when once this chief obstacle is removed, they might progressively advance in the pursuit of knowledge and learning. Most of the young men under Coldbrook and Carey seemed to identify India with Hinduism and regarded the Muslims as intruders. Like Martin, they felt that Hinduism might again become great under British encouragement. In their idea of Renaissance, sati and other objectionable Hindu customs were generally seen as examples of a degraded or medieval form of present day Hinduism. Though there were many generalizations about the golden age of Hindu civilization, no one was quite sure what the Hindu ethos was. Past was condemned as medieval and idolatry was attacked with strong Protestant indignation. So yes, that was about Carrie. And yes, Rishi and Nocturne the Patriot, if you have any thoughts, we can continue.
Yeah, it's
Marvelous.
self-explanatory, and it clearly exposes what Carey thought of the so-called natives and why he was so like emphatically uh, engaging in this practice of picking up the local languages. He wanted to have uh, high outreach and preach the word of Christ among the commoners so he could upgrade them and show them the true light. So we can compare this to the case of like David Livingstone. You may be familiar with this very famous name, Dr. David Livingstone, who was a Scottish doctor and a missionary, something that very few people know. So when he went to Africa, he was basically a pastor. He was a Christian missionary, and he called Africa a dark continent. He called the natives people living in darkness, and he claimed that the light of Christianity was basically enlightening them. So the attitude of Carey here uh, can be seen as very similar to the project that David Livingstone had tried out in Africa. His attitude towards the Bengalis, towards the Hindus, was very similar.
Indeed. And it's fascinating how like they will try to become authorities on our language and also get triggered when they are interacting with the locals who actually know the language and can easily detect that there are problems with the speaker. So he's getting enriched over that, and he's writing all of these things. After that, they will also translate our books so as to show that in present what Hindus are doing, those are actually false. But those falsities are actually imposed by these translations. It is not originally as such. So it's a crafty mission, in fact. It's a deliberate misinterpretation just to sow seeds of doubt so as to create vacuum, which then maybe they will use. And then, as they say at last, right, they might progressively advance in the pursuit of knowledge and learning, aka being Christian. It's not just normal learning or normal knowledge, it's Christian. Everything has to be towards that alone. Amazing, amazing. Yeah, Nain.
Yes, so that was the part on the missionaries. And this is particularly important because you see, as we shall cover in future episodes, that every level of our reformers, every level of Hindu society, they were kind of engaging with missionaries without really considering the true motives, except for, of course, the people who lived in the most traditional of ways. They were entirely rejective of missionaries. But whoever came close to the English, they became too receptive to the ideas of the missionaries, and this becomes quite problematic. So, moving ahead, uh, so the missionaries, though, they weren't the only ones who were actually founding knowledge institutions in Bengal and elsewhere. We see that in 1800, after the defeat of Mysore under Tipu Sultan, as kind of celebration from that, Lord Wellesley he founds a college for the learning of Hindu, or you can say Indian texts, or even Persian texts in general. In 1800, Lord Wellesley establishes Fort William College. Ostensibly, this is an institution to train East India Company civil servants in Indian languages. So the British were recognizing that effective rule required officers who could actually communicate with the rule. On the surface, this looks like respect for the Indian languages. The college actually employed 50 munshis who were proficient in Persian, and over probably, I think, 20 pandits as well, who were proficient in Sanskrit and the local languages. It commissioned many translations, many grammars, many textbooks, and so on. It seemed to actually value the indigenous knowledge. But looking at the structure, who runs the institution? We see that British administrators are the people running it. Who sets the curriculum? The British needs. British governor was usually the one setting the curriculum. And what is the outcome from the knowledge that is being produced? The outcome is that the British learn to rule more effectively the populace. The Indian scholars at Fort William, they were just employees. They produced the knowledge for British consumption. Their expertise was basically extracted, systematized, and returned to India in the form of quote unquote better colonial administration. This is different from the Asiatic society, which we saw earlier, but it is also related. The Asiatic society, which we saw, that was about understanding India's past for scholarly purposes, but also to understand for better administration. But Fort William College was explicitly to understand India's present for administrative purposes. Uh, Both of them position British institutions as a proper home for Indian knowledge. The deeper irony is also seen here. The scholars who worked at Fort William, people like Mrityunjay Vidyalankar, they were actually genuine experts in their traditions. But by working within the British institutions, they legitimized the idea that British institutions were the appropriate venue to discuss, to actually produce works from for their Indian learning. And through this, they had also train the officers who would administer and transform their own society as well. The broader vision of Richard Wellesley, who was the Governor General for 7 years at that time, he wanted to actually make an Oxford of the East, where the British men would receive the cultural and linguistic education of the East necessary for the effective imperial administration in the East. In Britain itself, the college was kind of controversial. I have seen several letters of Wellesley writing back and forth to the British Parliament asking for permission to start such a college. And after a lot of deliberation and a lot of fundraising, they finally made it happen in 1800. His idea was that ruling India actually required serious ideological preparation, and he did not just want the company officers to just be clerks, but actually cultivated administrators. We can actually see a kind of parallel to this, that the manner in which IAS officers who are trained in Indian, you can say, systems and so on, they are also kind of cultivated in a kind of serious manner, and they're not merely clerks as well.
True.
The work inside the college, so the work inside the college was largely linguistic. That must be emphasized, but it also had some debates, and I have seen that a lot of contemporary topics that we also discuss down till today, they were actually being discussed in Fort William College in those days. Things like whether Hindi, or as it was called back then, Hindustani, whether it is the lingua franca of India, and then things like whether Sanskrit is the mother of all languages. Such things were actually being discussed at Fort William colleges in like 200 years ago. That is also an impressive thing. The the main shift in Fort William College is the broader epistemological shift, basically. That before British rule, Indian knowledge systems they had their own institutions, right? The particularly in Bengal, they had the tolls, Sanskrit schools, basically, and each you can say sampradaya had its own mutts, the monasteries, and the rulers would patronize these basically. But now, under the Asiatic Society or Fort William College, the universities become new prestige centers, basically. And any Indian scholar, when he wants patronage or when he wants recognition, he actually moves towards these institutions. So, the basic consequence here is that Indian knowledge is preserved, but it is recontextualized. That the Sanskrit texts are being studied, but they are being studied for a different reason from earlier. You can say that in a classical toll, it would be actually be studied for its own content, but in the Fort William College, it was being studied for its value to the administration. And this uh, kind of creates a doubt in the mind that if the work that you're doing for the, uh, or no, what should I say? If your texts have value for the conqueror or the colonizer as much to benefit his administration, then how long does it take till you begin seeing it the same way, that your texts are just a text to further their administration? That was one thing.
Indeed.
So yeah, this is a Wellesley's minute on the founding of the College of Fort William. The listeners can read it if they like. So this again shows the same thing, that the Bengal's traditional scholars, they were now working day and night to actually equip the colonizers with their own knowledge, with the knowledge that the colonizers were planning to dominate them. The scholars, they were not also forced to work there. They were probably very grateful for the employment, and they were actually paid very high as well. But the structural position that indigenous experts as employees of a foreign institution, that captures something about how the knowledge systems were being reorganized. So yeah. This was about Wellesley's Minute as well, right? Any points on this, Rishi and Nocturnal Patriot?
Yeah. Um, so to support your point, just for the sake of listener, uh, I'm gonna repeat the names of the pundits, especially because there were also Maulvis over there. But apparently, William Carey was given the Sirampur mission triad, uh, the intellectual head, as Nina told us today. So he was apparently given the duty to bring such pundits from various places like Malda, Navadvip, etc. So some of the names are the main pandit was, as Nina told us today, Mrityunjay Vidyalankar. The second one was Ramnath Vidyavachaspati, and their assistant would be Shripati Mukhopadhyay or Mukherjee. And then there were a couple of others like Ananda Chandra Mukhopadhyay, Rajiv Lochan Mukhopadhyay, Kashinath Tarkapanchanan, Padmalochan Chudamani, and the notorious Ram Ram Bosu, whom we will discuss later on. So yeah, these were the guys, and they used to write simple works for the colonial administrators, biographies of various kings, historical works, translations of various Persian works as well were made, such as Chandicharan Munshi translated Tota Nama as Tota Itihas, um, and there and then other works like Hitopadesh, Panchatantra, inspired works. Um, Dictionaries were also made at that time. Mohan Prasad Thakur makes some of them. English to Bengali. These English to Bengali, English to Udiya dictionaries also come by then, and some works of philosophy as well, Purusha Pariksha and Padartha Kaumudi and so on. So these works were being authored at that time, and I think the traditional pundits especially had this thought process that okay, this is an opportunity for us to publish our works using modern technology which had come by then. So why not use it? uh, it's gone it's gonna be useful, especially for larger society, as well as it will incur favor from the British administration at that time as well. Also, maybe they thought they could influence some of them. Ambitious, but I don't think they succeeded in that. Of course, yeah, Nina
Yes. One thing to
or
note is
Patriot.
that the wages of that were paid at Fort William, they were exorbitant, basically. They were very high. So anyone who was employed there, they basically made a fortune.
True. Like Mrityunjay Vidyalankar, I'm looking at now 200 rupees per month. His salary was at that time 200 rupees is way way more. Like no traditional scholar could have that sort of money running his stall or chatushpatis at all. Yeah.
So yes, Nocturnal Patriot, any points, or shall we move on?
Yes, we can move on. I think Rishi covered this area quite well. So yeah.
Okay, so we move on to an example of a person who was working at Fort William College, a particularly interesting example who is different from the other pundits we discussed, basically. So the case study here we discuss is of Ram Rambasu. He is an important example because it shows all about how exactly the psychological aspects of all the policies that we follow till now, how exactly did they work on someone's mind? So he is someone who never converted to Christianity. He remained nominally Hindu. But let's look at what he wrote in his Gyanodaya, which is a pamphlet, the dawn of knowledge, or which is also translated as enlightenment in modern times. He argued that the Vedas originally taught pure monotheism. He claimed that the later Hindu practice, especially image worship, were corruptions introduced by crafty Brahmins to maintain that power. Does this argument sound familiar? It should. It's the Orientalist schema. It's a golden age followed by dark age. It's the Protestant critique. It's pure original religion corrupted by priestly manipulation. Ram Basu had absorbed these frameworks and was applying them to his own tradition. And the irony is that he actually never converted. Why is that so? That is because the society was still quite strong at the time, and he would actually be hounded out of it if he actually tried to convert. So yeah, that was one thing. But you see the point here that this is the first kind of example of psychological colonization we see in the mind. That the colonized has to apply the colonizer's criteria to define his religion. He tries to remain Hindu, but he's trying to uh, change everything that is about Hinduism in the contemporary times. That is a serious crack in civilizational confidence. No doubt about this or that practice, but doubt about whether your tradition is living form, whether it has validity at all.
So yes, it was basically the fear of consequences that prevented such people from converting, but their core had already been infected. They already questioned whatever beliefs they had that had been passed down to them in the previous generations, or even whatever their pundits told them. And the fact that they were already trying to climb up in the social order, and they were being paid handsomely for the job they did, meant that they didn't really see merit in uh, remaining attached to their roots. So they were constantly questioning their identity. They didn't have much, they didn't really have any native rooted values to pass down to their children, because they themselves had grown up questioning such ideals, because they were earning their bread by questioning their own ideals and working for an alien person. And of course,
Yes,
now we had the elites divided between, we had some traditional elites who were like safeguarding the Hindu rights and the Hindu front, while we had these people who were basically being paid by the British to finance their own ruin.
on the case of Ram Basu, a lot more can be actually said. First of all, we see that originally his doubts with Hinduism started with his, you can say, as he was a Persianized Hindu already, that he grew up learning Persian and Arabic more than Sanskrit in the beginning. That kind of acquainted him with Islamic theology more than Hindu theology, and those kind of doubts persisted in his mind. This is also noted by Carey himself. Uh, Ram Basu was a munshi of William Carey, the same guy we discussed earlier. And Ram Basu is also the same guy who teaches Carey Bengali and Sanskrit.
Yet
This is
another
what the
thing that
traditional narrative.
I think we should add is
Yes,
that earlier we spoke of Anglophiles who came from elite entitled backgrounds. Ram Basu did not
yes,
come from an elite entitled background. He was a common man who, like, he was, you can say, a member of, he would have been a member of the middle class nowadays. So he was a common man who didn't have an elite entitled background, and he got this sudden opportunity to rise, in the social, rise along the social ladder. So this was a big opportunity for him, and he became this useful clerk for the British willingly.
yes. So particularly his task was that of a munshi. Everywhere he went, he was basically a munshi. That was the title given to him in those days. Then, apart from that, there are several things to be said about his moral character as well, which even was questioned by his own friend Carey. In 1796, it is said that Carey learned that his munshi had seduced a young widow, made her pregnant, and then also aborted the child. And then he believes that this man is hopeless and he does not wish for him to take up the gospel and so on. That kind of phase also happens, and then he also gets
So yeah, he
He
is
assumed everything.
debauched enough to make a move on a widow, so which was unthinkable back then. Not just any
Exactly.
lady, but a widow, and he gets her with child.
Yes.
And then, of course, there's an abortion that follows. So he was so debauched that he was condemned even by his great friend William Carey. That was indeed something worth noting.
And when the Fort William College opens, they kind of put their differences aside and again open again together. And they once again began working together to translate works, to help Carey understand Hindu works, and so on. And somewhere along the way, he begins internalizing every argument that Carey is making. Uh, Ramram Basu was also the member of Carey's Bengali department, which is where he wrote various texts. One of them, quite prominently known as Pratapaditya Charitra, which perhaps Rishi and you can speak. But yeah, I'll continue briefly. So these kind of texts he wrote. Then he also, what else was there? Uh, Trying to remember more.
Biographies of Biography of Christ in Bengali that he wrote.
Yes, yes. He wrote a biography of Christ, and as we mentioned earlier, he wrote that pamphlet called Kyanodaya, where he tries to portray Hindu religion as superstition and all that, basically internalizing all the
So
Orientalist
he
and
was the one,
missionary
like, he
nonsense.
wanted to be this person who was imparting the actual gyan, the gyan that actually means something, the gyan that helps you survive in this world infested with people who have come to save you. These white sahibs who have come to emancipate you from your misery. But that is basically the kind of gyan he wished to impart. He wanted to make brown sahibs of the natives, perhaps, because he was gradually progressing towards becoming one.
And also, the text which I mentioned, Gyanodaya, that is particularly important because this kind of tone, which is uh, particularly an attack on idolatry, an attack on, you can say, polytheism, this is also taken up by the future societies, the future organizations that come up, particularly the Brahmo Samaj, and even later the Arya Samaj, and so on.
Yes, so we can say that the seeds have already been sown at this stage. The seeds of questioning idolatry by considering Hindu practices to be defunct and so on.
Yeah,
And the mythical
basically,
monotheistic golden age as well. That
yeah.
also persisted.
Basically, they thought that they were reforming Hinduism back to its golden age, but in reality, what they were doing is they were molding it into their new Protestant uh, sensibilities, basically.
Completely. So, Nina,
Huh.
any
And
points
Any,
also the
or
fact that I suppose the British also, I mean, they possibly saw it in this manner that, I mean, what they, for them, a homogenized society, a society with a homogeneous identity would be easier to rule because they would willingly obey whatever rules were placed on them, whereas a diverse society would be very hard to bring under a common governance. So they wanted a compliant audience. They wanted a compliant set of followers, which they would get if they were able to uh, make people conform to a set of common beliefs. Monotheism helps in such in establishing such an order, because as we can see, even if we study the history of the monotheistic religions were made for tribes. So they helped tribes fall in order and follow a common authority. So, of course, they saw merit in imposing such a system in a country as diverse as India. But apparently, they didn't have much success so far. So maybe they assumed probably they hoped that the natives would be able to speak to the natives better in this regard.
yes, and did you? Did you and Rishi have any thoughts on his literary works, particularly, say, Pratapaditya
Oh
Charitra?
yeah,
Because you see that lot of glorification is done about him being the first Bengali writer and so on.
yeah. So his Pratapaditya Charitra, I think Patriot can speak much more, cause oh my God, that is a horrendous work from any standards. Cause in that work he has tried to mix in all sorts of myths and fairy tales into it, and all sorts of aspersions as well. So it's a very carefully knitted, narrativized retelling of a um, actual historical character. In
And of
fact, it's
course,
not
like
a good book.
knowing the fact that Pratapaditya happened to be a celebrated icon among the Bengali Hindus, he yet there is also the fact that he lost. He makes efforts to ensure that Pratapaditya remains a character maligned. So he adds certain miracles. He adds certain weird happenstances, like omens, some ominous happenings, like a certain eagle was found to fly in a certain direction, which made Pratapaditya's own father claim that Pratapaditya would be the cause of his family's ruin, and so on. So a lot of incidents that he inserted deliberately, and these were basically ominous incidents that made certain main characters in the story utter that Pratapaditya, oh, he's doomed. Despite having potential, he's doomed to fail. He's doomed to ruin. He's doomed to ruin his own families, drag his family through the dirt, and so on. So basically, in a way, justifying the downfall of Pratapaditya, which would obviously logically lead eventually to the takeover by the British. Because of course, for the British, they wanted to justify their takeover and colonization of the country at any cost. So any prior
That's
icon would have
interesting.
to be maligned.
That's interesting that he uses ominous happenings at all because he is considering everything superstitious in our
Yes,
tradition.
yes.
So, can I
And there's
quote
the
a
Krishna
point
Stava. I think
about?
Krishna Stava or Krishna Stuti. You'll know better.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
other book,
Krishna, yes,
Krishna Stava.
absolutely. Uh,
So in that
yeah, so
he tries to familiarize the Bengali native with the character of the grand character of Jesus Christ, the modern age prophet, and he even creates a Bengalified word for Jesus, Jijach. So yeah, he goes to a great extent to try to familiarize the Bengali and make Christ accepted in the Bengali psyche.
So, to bolster the argument of Patriot, I will just quote a passage of Mr. Ward on this issue. 1808, April 25, he says, yesterday at Calcutta, Ram Bosu, he's referring to Ram Bosu, Ram Bosu called upon me at Brother Carey's lodgings by appointment. I wished to engage him to write for us a life of Christ in Bengali rhyme to give away in the hope it might be useful. The Hindus have been used to scarcely anything but poetry, and in consequence, the Bible is more strange and unacceptable to them. They have their histories of Ram, Krishna, etc. in poetry, and it is probable that these poems have contributed more than anything else to fix and disseminate the peculiar notions and customs of the Hindus. Ram Bosu was of the same opinion and entered very cheerfully into the work, promising to devote his nights to it till it was accomplished. End quote. So,
He goes as far as declaring Jesus as Ishwara Putra, basically conglomerating their father of Jesus with our concept of Ishwara. So that is there.
yeah,
So their Ishaputra
and
is Isha. Okay, I think, I think in their theology, Jesus himself is known as Yeshu, Isha, yes. So Isa Masi or Isha. But yeah, he goes as far as declaring that individual as Ishwara Putra. So yeah, a lot of facts were muddled by him, only to get
Indeed.
across to the Bengali natives and somehow persuade them to accept this new world order and get enlightened.
Ah, so
Yeah.
apart from this, the viewers might be curious that what are he's doing all this kind of antics, yet he's still a Hindu, so to speak, and there are a lot of people glorifying him for this particular fact that he remained a Hindu. No, the truth is that he remained a Hindu out of cowardice. The thing was that in those days, the concept of conversion was not really understood by Hindus. Um, if he were to convert, then he would actually be outcasted. So to remain in his caste, he did not convert. And this is actually admitted to him in his writings to Carrie and others.
And he even says that he is apprehensive that his wife might leave him. So if his wife and children desert him, I mean, the Hindu laws would require him to pay for their upkeep. So Hindus have always had the system of alimony, so called. So the price for the wife and child's upkeep would have to be paid for by him eternally. He didn't want those expenses of sudden, you know, a separation from his wife. So the reason he remained
In general,
a
he was
Hindu by the
afraid of
book,
being outcasted.
yeah, he just didn't want to face the complications. For
Yeah.
example, there are
He
other
would lose his
elites who,
property.
for being Anglophiles, did get outcasted. They had the
Hmm.
like, I mean, they had they were affluent people and they could afford to get outcasted. They could make a living by themselves. But like I said, uh, Ram Basu didn't come from an affluent background. Whatever money he made was through being a useful clerk. He didn't want to lose that fortune on the upkeep of his family.
Correct. So yeah, that was Ram Basu, and we can move on to the next slide then.
Hmm.
So overall, we look back at all the things we have discussed. So by 1800, a new kind of elite was emerging. We can identify the nucleus of what would later be called the Bhattulu, the respectable people, or you can say, I don't know the literal Bengali translation, but I think it means respectable people, or the Bengali middle class. And you can kind of identify their characteristics as well, that they wear the Bengali dress at home, but they wear the English coats for their portraits or for their events. They speak Bengali, but they learn English, and they write in
They
English,
have
but
refined
they also
taste
read
and
Sanskrit
refined
text.
consumption patterns which differ from the rest. That is also there.
Yes, and the occupations of them were also broadly the similar ones, as clerks, as teachers, as translators, as agents, as
Anyone who was
lawyers.
useful to the British order could be said to
Basically,
belong to this
positions
class.
that served the colonial administration.
Yes.
We have then our exemplar of one of these new elites, or you can say an old elite who was transformed under the new administration into one of the new elite. He was Ram Mohan Roy, born in 1772. So after the British actually had, he's born far after Clive had actually won in Plassey. His family lost position under the permanent settlement, and his a part of his early career it was actually spent working for the company. He learned English, Sanskrit, Persian, Arabic, and it is said even he knew Hebrew. So in some aspects, he actually was quite a polyglot and genuinely learned in some manners. But he also came to believe in the nobility of the English intentions. He genuinely believed that the British were bringing progress to India, that the Hindu society needed reformation according to rational principles of the British, that the path forward required collaboration with the British power. So, we have several questions in mind. We don't seek to answer them right away, that whether he was a collaborator or was he a visionary. Both framings miss something. But he was definitely a man responding to the pressures of his times with his own intellectual capacity. and with the resources given to him by British categories. So externally, he was very confident, but internally torn. That was the new Bengali Bhadralok that arise in this age. So they were proud Hindus who had
Mhm.
absorbed the idea that in their tradition, in its current form was inadequate, but in the past it was great. But and they also believed that salvation that lay in ideas from abroad. And here we see an excerpt from his own writings, an autobiographical sketch from a letter he writes to. I'm like the name isn't coming to me right now, but yeah, he writes to someone, to an Englishman. He basically points out how um, initially he was also confronted with feelings of aversion towards the British power in India. But when he reached the age of 20, his father recalled him and he restored him to his favor. And he began to see the Europeans in a new light. This is even before he learned English, in fact. And soon after that made myself tolerably acquainted with their laws and forms of government. Finding them generally more intelligent, more steady and moderate in their conduct, I gave up my prejudice against them and became applied to in their favor, feeling persuaded that their rule, though a foreign yoke, would lead more speedily and surely to the amelioration of the native inhabitants. And I enjoyed the confidence of several of them, even in their public capacity. So yes, this is the kind of change of heart Ram Mohan Roy had, which was in some senses milder than Ram Basu, but as we will see, that even he has certain radical views that we begin encountering later.
Yep.
So, any thoughts on this,
Ramram
Rishi and
Basu.
Dr. Peter?
Yeah, so now we see that with Ram Mohan there is a change of uh, what you had alluded, right? Like framework. Uh, the Hindu framework itself will be changed now with the Western framework now coming in. So at first he is like he using his so-called Hindu framework, which he has a bit knowledge of from his own parents, I guess. So hereditary knowledge that he had inculcated within himself, which created aversion for the British, but long engagements with them changed his mind. Totally, in fact, now he is a champion of their rule here in India. He completely believes that even though they are foreigners, but their ways are much more superior, and therefore they should be remaining in India and should be changing us, in fact, and that would be in our benefit. So we'll go much more deeper into this, I guess, later on. But this is just a preface to further discussions, I guess. Yeah. Any comments?
Nocturnal Patriot, any thoughts on Ram Mohan Roy? Though we will also cover him later in later episodes as well.
Yeah, I think Ram Mohan Roy can be. We will be going into greater detail anyway, so we are good so far.
Yes.
By the way, on Ram Basu, I think we should. I don't know if it's good or not. Like, should we quote one of his para, like what he writes to some Dr. Ridley about his own conversion and all of that? What do you think?
Oh, yes, we can do that as well. I think it is given here, right? No, it's not here. I'll just open that. That would be quite that would be quite useful to understand his actual mindset also.
Yeah, because I think the audience needs to know um, clearly, at least, what was the mentality, because people tend to forget it or just gloss over it. Because what has happened is this guy has been praised out of proportion later on in modern times, in Bengal especially, because of his supposed literary contributions alone. Those were so good that everything gets subsided. even the crime that he did, Patriot, which you said, like the assault on that woman, a widow, especially.
The particular achievement that people bring him up for is that he wrote the first Bengali text or something, and the Pratapaditya Charitra, no? That is the particular
Yeah,
achievement that
yeah,
we see being brought up again and again. But that was not really an achievement when you think about it.
yeah. You had someone like Rajiv Lochan writing about Maharaja Krishna Chandra Rai at that time, at that very institution. He's a co-worker with this guy. So I don't know what kind of credit does he get. Like, why does he get much more than the Rajiv Lochan guy? It makes no sense to me, at least.
Even the head Pandit, or you can see the head, uh, you can see the head from the Hindu side, Mrityunjay Vidyalankar. He also wrote various texts, including one
Oh
Rajabali,
yeah, yeah.
which was a
So we
more
need to take note of this
comprehensive history of
disproportionate praise, this
India.
tradition of heaping disproportionate praise on certain individuals, and yet their contemporaries remaining neglected. We need to investigate the reason why. And if we like, the more we discuss, we understand why this possibly happened. Because a certain group of individuals were found to be promoting British interests and thus were applauded throughout by whoever kept promoting British interests. The others remained neglected.
Yes, that was there. So for now, if we have any points on Ram Ram, we'll just cover it in a moment. But for now, I'll move on to the next slide. So we are moving towards the ending of our discussion on this. We have covered the entire period from the Battle of Plassey, 1757 to 1800, and also set the background for basically what happens in Bengal over the 19th century. This slide synthesizes what we've basically covered: four vectors of erosion operating simultaneously between 1757 and 1800. So there's a political aspect, the loss of sovereignty at Plassey, though it was not Hindus who technically lost sovereignty, but it did show that arms would no longer be useful after this, and only diplomacy and service would render them power. The elite, they basically went from being decision makers to order takers. Their political agency was virtually gone. Then there's the economic aspect, the aspect that plunder and famine showed that prosperity could evaporate under the foreign exploitation, that the permanent settlement redistributed wealth to basically those who collaborated, and the old economic basis of the elite was destroyed. Then there is a social aspect, the aspect when it comes to the permanent settlement and the racial bar dismantling the traditional hierarchy and traditional power structures, and how old families fell with these rules and new upstarts rose. The part two status now basically ran through British institutions. Finally, there is the cultural aspect, and this is perhaps the most important, affecting the three others profoundly. The first would come the Orientalist praise of ancient India, which came bundled with contempt for the contemporary Hinduism. Then there was the missionaries who attacked Hindu religion directly, but also borrowing from the contempt of the Orientalists. Then there were the new institutions, uh, basically the fountainheads of the Orientalist movement, the Asiatic Society, the Fort William College, and even the missionary presses, which became the venues for their intellectual life. This quote captures it perfectly, basically. The British intrusion so disrupted the social system of the traditional elite that educated Hindus became receptive to a narrative of decline and the need for change. So, all in all, by 1800, the Hindu elite had lost political power, lost economic independence, lost monopoly over their own learning, and crucially, or you can say at least they were losing monopoly over their own learning. And crucially, they lost full confidence, or they lost partial confidence in their social and religious norms. This wasn't a full-scale crisis yet, but it was the seeds were sown for the next generation to actually see a full-scale crisis. The foundations had basically been laid. So yeah, this was that.
Yeah,
Oh,
what a disaster.
so Rishi, I believe you found the part on Ram Ram
Yeah,
Basu.
yeah. Yep, I have. I've shared it with you. Yeah.
So yeah, we can discuss this. I believe he writes a letter to, or it's from Mrs. Ward's journal, right?
No, it's a letter of his. You were right. It's a letter of his to Dr. Reland, uh, translated by Carey
No.
himself.
Okay, okay. So do I read it from the
Yeah.
second page or the first page here?
The first page, the left page, first para. Oh, sir. That.
Okay, okay. You're right. So in this letter, we see that he writes the following. Oh, sir, I am the most wretched. When the gospel was first published in the country, I heard it. Mr. Thomas had been here but a few days when I became his munshi. I believe he's talking about which a particular Thomas. I forgot his name, but he was there.
Yeah,
He had been,
he was there.
uh, he was one of the British officers only. He had
Mhm.
been there but a few days when I became his munshi and taught him the language of the country. After he had learnt a little, he began to translate and preach in many places where he was much esteemed, where the word was manifested to many people. After this, Mr. Carey came hither. I also taught him the language, and the gospel also proclaimed. As I was under Mr. Thomas, so I remained. I understood something of the gospel and can make it known a little to the others, but cannot leave my caste. This is my great difficulty. But what God had said in I think Matthew 6, a particular quotation
Mhm.
from Bible, gives me hope. This I seek after and have no hope from other God. Whatever else relates to me, you will understand from Mr. Carey's letters. So yes, this validates a point which I was stating earlier that he was afraid of leaving his own caste.
Indeed. Exactly what you had said. That is proven from him. He was a complete Christian by heart, but he could not leave because of his caste.
And also the fact that like social boycott often accompanied these ostracizations. So many other basic services like milk, clothing, food in general, groceries would be denied to him by the society if he were to be ostracized. That's what he feared. He was apprehensive about such consequences, and therefore and of course, he might have to leave the village or the locality that he was dwelling in because others, his neighbors, would not keep social relations with him. That was an understandable consequence of getting converted. Those were what he didn't want to face. So he converted in everything except name. Hence the question that follows.
Yes. So moving on towards the end of the presentation, we have basically covered a lot of topics today. And I want to end this more with a question for the audience and not with an answer, so that you can ponder about the topic, uh, about all the topics we have discussed and how it can relate to the question I'm about to ask. So, when we celebrate the Bengal Renaissance, what are exactly we celebrating? Are we celebrating a flowering of creativity and reform? Or are we celebrating the continuation of a civilizational erosion that began from the starting of British rule? The reason I ask this is because the reformers who emerged in 19th century, you can say Ram Mohan Roy and his successors, they were quite accomplished, quite brave as well, fighting against society to, for what they believed was right. So they created new institutions, new literature, new possibilities for Hindu society to basically advanced towards modernity. But they also made the mistake, at least in our perspective, of using the categories borrowed from the colonizers. They criticized Hinduism using Protestant standards. They defended Indian civilization by accepting the premise that it needed defending, that it had indeed declined from ancient glory into contemporary degradation. And every level of the way they were seeking British approval as the mark of legitimacy. Was this really the only path available to them? Uh, that we can't say for certain, but we can notice that at other times, other colonized civilizations sometimes found different paths. And perhaps if Bengal or India as a whole would have not been under British rule, we ourselves would have taken a different path towards modernity than we had taken during colonial rule. We might have had a complicated relation with our past because perhaps reform is needed sometimes and sometimes not. But uh, we wouldn't do a wholesale adoption of foreign frameworks at the cost of our own civilization. So, what made Bengal different? Why did we reform in this manner? That's what the part one of our investigation has tried to establish. The combination of the political conquest, the economic destabilization, the social revolution through policies, the cultural infiltration through missionaries, through Orientalists, they created very unique conditions that were favorable to our psychological colonization. But the story doesn't end here. The starting point which we brought up about the Hindu college, about young Bengal and its radicals, about how the Hindu college, which was founded by with certain ideas in mind, but ended up producing something to the contrary. We still haven't addressed that question with all this, but we are moving towards there. The debates that we see, that we shall see coming up in the future over sati, over widow remarriage, over English education, the Macaulay minute, and so on. They would become quite relevant in the future. So, but the background for all of these was the pattern that was established between 1757 and 1800. These same patterns would basically play out with more and more intensity over the years to come. That's for part two. So yes, that was the question. That what do we really think when we are celebrating when we are celebrating the Bengal Renaissance? With that, I think we can conclude the presentation here. And if Rishi and Dr. Patriot have any concluding points, we can move on.
Yeah, so this is for the audience, this is just a preamble. Today's very detailed discussion, and all kudos to Nainer, first of all, Patriot as well. Amazing, amazing presentation, amazing deliberation as well. It's just marvelous. A marvelous preamble for the next episodes to come. And there, uh, and in further podcasts as well, we will eventually decide as to what that renaissance meant. Because for the audience, I'll just give a clue over here. Renaissance in Europe meant remembering that golden age of classical Greek and Roman thought processes and frameworks that really changed that whole society as completely from a very dogmatic Christian perspective based outlook to a very different set of beliefs and movements which later on came over there.
And for them, it
But
was
in case
truly
of
a phase of enlightenment in which they tried their best to separate the church from the state, both the administration as well as to handle like any technological advancements or to help the industrialists with taking certain key decisions without the church interfering. So all that was achieved during the Renaissance. So it was a true case of enlightenment. Over here, it was significantly different. Here, our colonizers were trying to raise our standards to match their own Christian sensibilities, or to find a fault line through which they could propagate their religion to increase the size of the flock, like to behave as the shepherd and increase their flock.
Yes. And at the end of this presentation, I would like to give a particular thanks to a particular book which helped me process my thoughts a lot, and even for Rishi and Nocturnal Patriot. That is British Orientalism and the Bengal Renaissance by David Kopf. It is quite a detailed outline of all the events that happened over a broad period, even extending beyond the scope of what we discussed today. And it helps us to reframe our arguments with a very critical gaze to what we are traditionally taught about the narratives that happened in of those days. So yeah, that was one thing. Any questions do we see in the comments? Religion in itself is a culture. Yes, I suppose that is true. I suppose we don't see any questions as such.
Yeah.
Yes, for Hinduism,
Uh,
Hinduism is a civilizational culture, and Hinduism is tied with this entire land of Bharat Bhumi. That is something that the
yes,
missionaries or our colonizers either refused to acknowledge or were finding hard to stomach, because their own panths, I'd say, their own panths never had weren't this rich as in to accommodate such uh, you know such a perspective.
yes. I wouldn't say it as religion, because religion entirely mean a different thing. Uh, ours is dharma, like one and only dharma in this whole world or universe, as you say. We would like to differ that it is religion or not, but it is not religion.
So the question, what if what we call ourselves if the word Hindu is erased? That is a good question, but that is
Dharmic,
a question of
dharmic, because
identity markers.
we happen to be the only dharma, so we are dharmic. The
Ah,
others
Yes,
but
are not.
identity markers generally they're things to do with, say, a lineage or what region you come from, and so on.
Yes, and since the word Hindu is very tied to this land of India, and so is our dharma. So, regardless of whether we say Hindu or whether we say Dharma, it refers to this religion or this Dharma that evolved on this Bharat Bhumi. And as we have been told,
yes, yes.
even while Bharat Bhumi has been defined, what is Bharat Bhumi? Bharat Bhumi is the patch of land that was saved by Varaha Avatar from the confines of the ocean. The only patch of land where sacred yajnas, which was found to be fit for yajna bhumi, for carrying out sacred yajnas. So other patches of land
So
were
I
not
think,
found. So dharma can survive on this bhumi, and this
yeah.
has been prescribed in our shastras.
Also, like I think here Lord Venson or whatever. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correct. So I think you are using the word Hindu very loosely here. Like not your problem. Like it is being currently used as very loose word. Like I'm a Hindu. Like
Sure.
I am born Hindu, but so I'm a Hindu. Oh, which people are, but if they do not practice it, then they do not remain Hindu. That is a very simple fact. Like you need to practice it. Like you cannot live in terms of Christianism or like atheism and call yourself a Hindu. Then call yourself an atheist or a Christian, as per se. Okay, last question, I guess.
Okay. The word mlecha.
Yeah,
Richa
nocturnal
would be
patrol.
used for
I think.
The
anyone who's not Hindu, basically.
so basically the
I
mlecha
think.
term is an equivalent of alien
Uh,
here. So
I
those
think
who do not
Rishi here can. I think Rishi here can
probably
give a
yeah.
good explanation on this. Ah, Rishi, go on.
On Mlecha, yeah, on Mlecha it will be गोमांसखादको यस्य दुर्वादी बहुभाषते शास्त्राचारविहीनस्य म्लेच्छ इत्यभिधीयते. Yeah. So beef eaters and speaking against Vedas, speaking also foreign or debased languages or abuses, especially they are like quite, collectively all these qualities is found in certain set of people and they are named as militias. This is
And
the
the first
traditional
swechhachar, those who do
nomenclature.
not adhere to the dharmic protocol. So swechhachar.
Oh yes, yes,
Yes.
yes. Hmm.
They
And
act as they
also
please.
another thing annotated to this, like they are papatmas, so that's why we differ. Like we have so many strict rules, strict protocols for them. Like all this again, like we have that rebirth concept. So they did something very vile in their purva janma. Then they took birth in this. Then they became that. So yeah, all these equations are in play. So
For the
glitches is
lack
a
of a
very
proper
broad
word,
word.
I mean, since you ask such questions, the you must be familiar with the English word decorum. So we too have a dharmic decorum. Those who adhere to the dharmic
Yeah.
decorum
Yeah.
are Hindus. Those who do not are not lectures. I
Hmm.
mean, therefore they are lectures.
I think these are the
Next was the
questions.
question. Yeah, I think we can wrap it up now.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
Thank
Okay. Thank you everyone for sticking with us throughout the stream, and also let us know your thoughts about our presentation or about our topic. Anything in the comments,
Yes.
or you can mail us. And yes, this is a series. This is a series. We do not know like how long it will be. If we keep gaining on content on this thing, then it will just keep expanding. But yeah, it will be an interesting open series. So please do
Yes.
subscribe our channel
We
and
we would love it if we would
click
love
the
it
notification
if
bell.
the audience gave their thoughts in the comments. And yes, this is a series.
Exactly.
And if the audience wants us to pick up a certain topic about the history of Bengal during this period, we shall do that as well. We
Yes,
Any
definitely,
topic is
definitely.
of interest in this.
Yes, please do inform us with it. So we are ending it here. सभी को जय श्री राम, वंदे मातरम.
Jai Shri Ram.
you. Jai Shri Ram.